Dr. Bryson here again with a brief video on Emil Durkheim, uh, who was known as the father of sociology, or at least modern sociology. So we are going to discuss his theories related to crime. Now, Durkheim wrote extensively. He has a lot of writing. Um, if you were to purchase one of his books today in English, it would be fairly thick with very small type. He was very wordy. But Durkheim was one of the very early theorists of sociology. So he lived from 1858 to 1916. Now, he was French, but he was influenced by the American French and industrial revolutions. Very important to keep that in mind. So those revolutions, and what I believe that if he had seen the technological revolution that we are experiencing now, I think that his theories would have been fine-tuned, but I don't think they would have changed much. So he viewed societies as either mechanical or organic. So we'll talk about that in more depth in the next slide, which, by the way, is the only other slide. So this will be a fairly short video. But he is what was called a sociological functionalist. Now, functionalists believe that everything in society serves a function. Even crime. Crime is serving a function. Unfortunately, a lot of modern critical theory sociologists believe that functionalists are saying that, well, are condoning everything that is in society. So a functionalist would say that racism is serving a function. I will tell you that Emil Durkheim would not support racism. The function may be served because society is sick. In other words, if society weren't sick, it wouldn't have something serving a function. He also believed that our behavior is shaped by our society. And he called this the collective code or the collective conscience. He also coined the term anomie, which we'll talk about in a different theory because we're not going to really talk about Durkheim with anomie and string theory, but we will talk about that in a future unit. But anomie is a sense of normlessness that occurs when a society changes rapidly. Now, anomie and string theory are not about the society changing rapidly. But for Durkheim, anomie, just the concept of that, the idea that normlessness is there, it is there because the society is changing very rapidly as it did in the Industrial Revolution, but also the American and French revolutions caused a rapid change as well. Institutionalized norms lose their ability to regulate human needs and behaviors because changes are happening so quickly. Just imagine what I consider to be part two of the technological revolution that's happening now, which is the social media and government attempts to regulate that. Now, the Industrial Revolution created a great emphasis on prosperity in the US with little restraint on the appetite for success. Now, another later sociologist called this the American dream. For Durkheim, he might not have put it in quite this way. This is where we're going to get into more of the anomie and string theory. But Durkheim was one of the first to really say with any oomph that the Industrial Revolution put this emphasis on getting more and more goods and showing that one had money. So let's look at his major theory. He stated that, or hypothesized that societies become more organic as they move into a more industrialized society. He contrasted mechanical societies with organic societies. The third point down here, the third contrast in this chart, the agricultural-based economy versus the industrial-based economy, is perhaps the biggest difference. But if we were to add the technological societies here, I mean, this technological revolution here, we would go from agricultural-based economies to industrial-based economies to information sharing-based economies through the internet and other forms of the social influencers, the social media, just all of those platforms that are available via the internet. So what's happening, if Durkheim were here, would say that we're moving from a mechanical society to an organic society, and he might add a new type of society. I don't know what he would call it, but he might add a new type of society. But when society changes so quickly, crime begins to occur because the class differences aren't catching up so much. So in the mechanical society, I mean, let's look at this. He said it's more primitive. So please understand, he's not necessarily praising the mechanical over the organic. But he's saying that the mechanical is more primitive and it's more rural, whereas the organic society is more modern and urban. So we've already talked about the agriculture versus industry, but the simple division of labor with few divisions in the mechanical society, and that is true. My own family was an agricultural family until my grandparents' generation. My grandparents were the first generation to not make their living by working their own farm. My grandfather on my mother's side was worked for Appalachian Power. He started out as a lineman. Then as he got older, he became a groundman, and then he became a driver. My other grandfather was a skilled laborer. He was not a glass blower, but he would go to factories where there were skilled glass blowers, and he would etch on the final products. So he was somewhat of an artist. But their parents were farmers, and that's how they made their living. And what's interesting, especially my grandfather who worked for Appalachian Power, which is the side of the family I know the most about, if I go back to not his father's generation, but the generation before his father, so my great-great-grandparents' generation, the men and the women worked right alongside each other in the fields, feeding the animals. There were very few things that were considered women's work versus men's work. As we get into more of the organic society, those divisions actually start to take hold more strongly. So there are a lot more specialized divisions. And then as the organic society continued to grow, and we realized the reality of sexism and sex discrimination, then division of labor based on gender began to be questioned. Now, in mechanical societies, law was used to enforce conformity. In the rural areas, we conform with each other, and that's how we all survive. In organic societies, in urban areas, there are a lot of interactions between people. So the laws need to be more about the interactions amongst the divisions within those societies. So, and then the last one is a typically stronger collective conscience. What's interesting is in rural areas, they live much further apart. They don't see each other near as frequently, but there's a much stronger sense of community. Okay, what Durkheim called collective conscience, but what we would call community. And in the organic society, there is a weaker collective conscience. So the sense of community is nowhere near as strong. We can see the reality of this for all of those, quote, social influencers that are trying to create more of a sense of community. Another way that we can see this is in the political divide in the US right now. When I was in college, when I started college 40 years ago this fall, um, yes, there were political arguments and there were some political divisions, but it never really disrupted our sense of community. Those on opposite ends of the political spectrum still cared about each other and were together. And there was a sense of community between both sides of the political coin. But as our society has moved from organic to whatever Durkheim would call it in the technological age, with the technological revolution, that sense of community is nowhere near as strong. So now we have folks speaking out, trying to create a greater sense of community. We have what we call online communities, and in my mind, that's a contradiction in terms. How is it a community when we really don't interact other than through little tiny sound bites through social media? But for Durkheim, the reason we have crime is it serves a function of this too rapid change towards the organic society. We're growing too fast. Again, Durkheim would not advocate that crime is okay or good or a necessary part of society. He would simply say that it's serving a function and advocate for finding a way of serving that function better. I'm going to stop the screen share now. So that's what's very important for us to understand, that Durkheim didn't mean that crime was a good thing and that society needs it. He meant that it was serving a function, that the function was necessary. But true functionalists believe that we can find a better way of serving that function. We'll see you next video.